welcome back from a week off. I hope you had an enjoyable time since we met last with Jay Ash. And tonight, as you can see, we're going to move from looking at local economic development to looking at the role of arts and culture in a great city. And I'm extremely pleased that our new Chief of Arts and Culture has joined us, Julie Burros, who we've gotten to know since she arrived here in September and began in, I think, just this December. You were sworn into this new job created by Mayor Walsh, and my dear friend Colette Phillips, who I'll introduce in a second. I was very excited about this particular evening of the open classroom this year on the 21st Century City. Because one of the things that we were talking about this morning, if any of you heard WBUR, the Dukakis Center released our 12th annual Greater Boston Housing Report Card. And one of the good pieces of news about it, most of it's not such good news, is that we are keeping young people in town. We used to be losing thousands of them every year. We might have them come here to university or college, but then leave when they no longer could find housing or find jobs. They're now staying here, but putting a tremendous amount of pressure on the housing market. But one of the things that we also know from the work of Richard Florida, who writes about the creative class, and the work of others, is that what really attracts not only young people, but people my age to cities, is the ability to have a kind of almost never-ending parade of arts and culture. As some of you in the room know, I am on the board of the Lyric Stage, which is having a magnificent season this year and has a new play opening, I think, this week. My friend Glenda Fishman is here, who's also on the board with me, who's also the treasurer of the Huntington Theater. We have wonderful theater here. We have wonderful opera. We have wonderful music. And yet, when I first arrived here in 1971, the Lyric Stage had just begun, and it was the only repertory company in town. Of course, we have the ART over in Cambridge, and there's almost a night that almost no way that a night could go by that you couldn't find some good art, some good music, poetry, and of course fabulous museums that we have in a city of only 635,000 people. We're not New York. We're not Tokyo, we're not Paris, but we have a lively arts culture here, and one that is growing all the time, and we're going to hear more about it. I just got to know Julie when she came from Chicago, and for some time she worked in Chicago creating a lot of the cultural events and coordinating those for the city there. Those of you who know Chicago, it's rich in its cultural life, from its parks in Millennium Park to its theater, to its comedy clubs. And she is now here really bringing arts and coordinating arts throughout the city and working with a lot of us. Let me also introduce Colette Phillips. Colette is one of my oldest friends here. I always refer to her as a force of nature. She has been a major player in the communications industry in Massachusetts for some time, but she also runs a fabulous group called Get Connected, connected with a K, which brings together people of all diverse backgrounds, including, it turns out, white people. And she has these wonderful affairs, and I think I may have mentioned to you that I was one of her awardees this year, which I really enjoyed. I don't know if I mentioned this, but she decided that in addition to celebrating Hispanic women or Asian men or young black men, that she wanted to have an event in which she actually would celebrate white guys, white men who could jump, if I remember correctly. And she pulled together a group of people which included Mayor Walsh, then State Treasurer Steve Grossman, MGH CEO Peter Slavin, John Henry and Larry Lucchino of the Red Sox. Did we have Jonathan Kraft or Josh Kraft of the Patriots? I can't remember. And me. And I thought it was pretty exciting that I would be, awarded something for being a white guy, because growing up in Detroit in a community that was about, as I mentioned to you, 60% white and 40% black, I was 5'6.5" tall and a short white guy, and I always wanted to be a 6'2" black guy. So it was great getting an award from Get Connected, and particularly from Colette. So we're going to start and hear from Julie and what she's done maybe a little bit in Chicago and what she's planning to do here. We'll then hear from Colette, and then we'll take a little break, and then we'll have open Q&A. Julie Burros, welcome to Boston and welcome to Northeastern.
Good evening, everyone. I am going to err on the side of being brief. I'm not going to show our PowerPoint. I'm just going to dazzle you with words. And I've done a little bit of teaching, so I'm actually going to get a little bit academic and a little less practical in my remarks, and then we can explore together. Hopefully I'm bringing up more questions than answers for you, and then we can explore that in a dialogue, which I think is going to be really fun, and I'm looking forward to it more so than hearing me speak. So first I did want to tell you a little bit about what I'm here to do. I am the Chief of Arts and Culture. Sometimes I'm also called the Arts Commissioner. Some people have called me the Arts Czar. Sounds really different when you all say it than when I all say it. But I thought I would just start out and tell you what that means and what I'm charged with doing. It means that I do head up a department. It's called the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture, and we are responsible for public art. So the Boston Art Commission is a body that's attached to our department. We're charged with grant making to cultural nonprofits, and that's done with another sort of quasi-separate body that's staffed by us called the Boston Cultural Council. We also do exhibitions in public buildings like City Hall and the Strand Theater. We have programs that we operate, like the newly renamed, rejuvenated Poet Laureate program. We have an arts festival. We coordinate the open studios that happen all over the city. And we also operate the Strand Theater in Dorchester. So that's what the department I run is. Because I'm a chief, that means I'm at the cabinet level, which is unusual for this role, to be not just a department head, but to be kind of elevated to a leadership level. That means I sit at the table with all the other muckety-mucks in City Hall, and I can use that as a platform to advocate very, very strongly for working deeply intergovernmentally to leverage the assets and resources of all the city's departments to sort of grow our access and support of arts and cultures. So within my cabinet is not only the department I head up, but also the Boston Public Library. So I can actually advocate on behalf of the libraries to the wider cabinet. I sort of took to heart Barry's topic for tonight. The role of arts and culture in a great city is something that I am consumed with for the better part of my career. My training is as an urban planner. In the early part of my career, I actually worked in urban planning and then transitioned to the Department of Cultural Affairs, where I brought the skill set of a planner to sort of arts administration, cultural planning, cultural facility development, and ultimately the creation of a cultural plan for Chicago. So when we think of the role of arts and culture in a great city, actually in any city, I'd love for us to think in terms of the infrastructure for arts and culture, and to think about the word infrastructure and the concept of infrastructure as it relates to arts and culture. And I'm using arts and culture very deliberately, both words, in an extremely inclusive concept of that. Everybody has a different definition of what that includes, and we're going to be as open as we can in that concept. And that infrastructure includes public institutions, civic spaces, public art, festivals and events and ceremonies and rituals, the creative industries, and I'll get into a little bit and talk a little bit about this. And of course, artists and individuals and creators, and actually anyone who's doing something creative. So there's a human element to that infrastructure. And when we talk about public institutions, in all of these, I want to kind of press upon you that these all change over time. In the very earliest days of Boston, you know, the 1740s, I guess it was founded in 1630. I'm sort of expanding my concept of urban history to be sort of 200 years longer than what I'm used to understanding in Chicago. So that these institutions have changed greatly over time. Sometimes they've stayed quite the same, and sometimes they've changed. Our public institutions include meeting halls, performance spaces, gathering places. Faneuil Hall is a great example of that. It was supposed to be the marketplace of ideas, and now it's very much of a ceremonial place. There's performances there. Still has an important role in the life of the city. This includes our large theaters. The public institutions also include our sacred spaces of every single denomination. Just today, I was given a tour of many of the cultural assets in Roxbury, and we were at this incredible UUUM meeting house from, oh man, I think the I'm not going to get the date wrong, but it was this extraordinary building that's had a long, long life that's changed over the decades. So our sacred spaces have been houses of worship and also houses of culture. Our post offices and civic buildings, the State House, this is part of our infrastructure for culture. Libraries, schools and education, museums. And I'd love for us to think about how this infrastructure has adapted over time, sometimes easily, sometimes very uneasily and in difficult ways. Our civic spaces include parks, buildings, the pieces that connect them, all of that connective tissue between the private places and the public places. There are plazas and sort of extra spaces here in Boston. There's all kinds of urban spaces that are not quite private and a little bit public. Those are really the spaces that belong to all of us, and increasingly those are places where culture can happen. These are all this is also the connective tissue between the natural environment, right? You're very familiar with the concept of the emerald necklace here, and how the concept was for public health and for an asset for urban living to offset the crowding and the stress of urban living. I'd love to introduce to you a concept of the sapphire necklace. That's the waterways that I think have been seen as a divider, as a very much of a working place, now have transformed over the decades into cultural amenities. More and more, we're going to look at these waterways as places that connect us and don't divide us. There's new spaces that have been created. The Greenway is a great example. More and more that's becoming a connector and a cultural space, a place where people come together and can meet up. The Greenway has a new public art curator. He's a buddy of mine from Chicago, so we're really excited to see what kind of brand new thinking he's going to bring. There's going to be a major piece of public art, very large scale, very innovative. It's going to be a game changer in terms of introducing Boston to large-scale temporary public art that can really activate places and bring people to new spaces. And the mayor's charge with our civic spaces and our public spaces is to really be intentional about how we can elevate and improve the caliber of design in our civic spaces, that we have to sort of aim a little bit higher. There's a tremendous amount of building and transformation happening all over Boston, and we haven't done such a great job of demanding excellence in design from those who are building in the public realm. I also want to introduce to you that the public realm, even though it's built privately, it belongs to all of us. We're all moving through these spaces every day, and we claim ownership of them as the public in these public spaces. Public art is something that populates our public spaces, our private spaces sometimes as well. And Boston has taken a lot of knocks in terms of its caliber of public art. When I say public art, I mean all of the art in the public realm. A lot of people, their go-to, what they think of in terms of public art is the traditional, historic, memorial or bronze statue in a public park. And I'd love for us to think about and explore in Boston the role of public art. Why is this there? Having art in public places is an ancient tradition. It goes back as far as human civilization. Sometimes its role has been decorative, sometimes it's symbolic or didactic. It could be functional, but maybe there's another role that public art can serve in terms of expressing an idea, bringing people together, moving us forward, addressing issues of public health perhaps. It would be very exciting to explore new ideas about how public art can truly serve the public. We're going to be celebrating the 125th anniversary of the Boston Art Commission. This is one of the oldest bodies for public art in the US. Boston really has an august tradition that I think we've maybe underfunded a little bit, and it needs a lot of resources, and it needs an expertise and a curatorial eye that we're going to try to bring to the table. Permanent public art also suffers a little bit from its changing context. You put a statue in a spot 300 years ago, and the city changes around it. And the context, the relationship you have, people forget, what was this war? What was this battle? Who was this person? Why were they important enough to have this statue? I think we take them for granted when we see them day in and day out. Mostly you see visitors who walk up to a statue and take their picture. And bringing that back, that meaning that might have been forgotten over the decades and indeed even over the centuries. My department is charged not only with the approval and the permitting of public art, but with the stewardship and the care of that public art. When we build a new statue and we put it somewhere in the public realm, it becomes a piece of the permanent collection of the city. We own it and are charged with taking care of it forever. We haven't done such a great job of caring for our piece of public art. You'll see walking around the street that there's a need for repair, a real need for stewardship of that collection. It is something I'm really bringing some best practices to Boston in terms of funding it, conserving it, really managing it, truly like the museum collection that it really is. Many, many cities have mechanisms in place that are legislated for funding public art. We have very few mechanisms in Boston for doing that. You might be familiar with a concept called Percent for Art. The former governor, Patrick, signed an executive order to create a Percent for Art program for the state of Massachusetts that would mandate 1% of the capital budget of any new public building built in the state be required to be spent on artwork for that building. This is a mechanism that's in place in about 25 different states in the US, including Illinois, where I came from. Hundreds of cities, 300 and something cities in the US, or municipalities I should say, have Percent for Art ordinances. And all of them are a little bit different. There's one in Chicago that actually is a very, very small program. Other cities like Philadelphia and Seattle have extremely robust programs where they're not only funding, let's say, a mural in a subway station or a statue in a public building, but they're actually using that mechanism to fund an artist in residence in the transit agency who then very deliberately and systematically figures out what's the role of art within that agency, within all the new rail lines or all the new plans that the agency is coming. Very, very innovative. Something I'd really like to pursue for Boston. Not necessarily an ordinance that compels us to do a Percent for Art, but to adopt the best practices of incorporating art and artists and innovative ideas into the work of city government. We're really interested in pursuing new approaches, temporary artwork, so that there's something new and something relevant and fresh. You would come back again and again to see how it's changed, how the space has changed. and frankly to bring more opportunities to local artists to participate in the creation of public art. Another really important part of the infrastructure is festivals and events. This is the oftentimes free, very social, very friendly, kind of the low barrier entry point for arts and culture for many, many people. There's a great study done by the NEA that shows that festivals are the #1 way that people experience new cultures and can interact with professional creative people in a very friendly setting. And I'd like to explore how festivals reflect the identity of a place and the culture of a community, and really help to give voice to what are the values of our city. Many other countries and cities have a long, long tradition of festivals. I was in China last summer, and they told me about their festivals that go back, their festival traditions go back for thousands of years. It's deeply rooted in the history of the country and of the people, and it really reflects their values as a society. Boston is not really known as a festival city. Of course, there are fantastic festivals here. There are lots of free public festivals. There are newer festivals that are ticketed. But I've heard a lot about how, oh, we used to have this festival, we used to have that, we don't have that anymore. I'd really like for us to look at what's our infrastructure for supporting festivals, not only issuing permits and our rules and regulations, which I understand can be really quite complex and Byzantine, but how can we have physical infrastructure for festivals that better supports what we're doing? The city recently issued a request for ideas for the redesign of City Hall Plaza. City Hall Plaza is actually the home of many, many festivals. And I was just in Montreal actually looking at their festival quarter, and they've actually built in permanent infrastructure with lights and power and sound, Wi-Fi, that makes it so much easier for a festival to load in and load out quickly. They're actually able to do more festivals much cheaper. And quite frankly, the space looks better. You don't have all this temporary equipment. It's all part of the design of the physical space. It's an extremely exciting model for Boston to look at as a best practice. And then there's the creative industries. Professor Bluestone mentioned this very briefly in his remarks. The creative industries is a fairly new concept in sort of the cultural policy realm. And this is a term that really encompasses traditionally the for-profit arts and culture. There's been a real traditional divide between the nonprofit arts and the for-profit arts. But the reality is it's one very, very deeply intertwined ecosystem. Creative people have hybrid practices, right? So someone who's a musician might also be a painter, might also do game design. Creative people do a very wide variety of things in order to make a living and also to use their creative tools. They're not distinguishing between the for-profit and the not-for-profit as they go about their creative work. But our support infrastructure of grant making and programs has largely only addressed the nonprofit arts and culture world. And so there's, especially in Boston, we really haven't solidified a policy approach and a programmatic approach to the creative industries. It's something we're going to be working on. So this is the music industry, the film industry, broadcasting, digital media, game design, high tech, on and on and on. This is a really important part of our cultural infrastructure and our creative infrastructure. And as a matter of fact, it really represents a very important piece of our economy, jobs and industries and companies. So we're starting to have a much deeper understanding of how the lines between for-profit and non-for-profit have blurred tremendously. And as a matter of fact, there's the last year's winner of Mass Challenge was actually an arts startup called Artlifting. And they're actually an L3C, which is a corporation that actually has a charitable mission. It's not a nonprofit. It's not a typical company. And they had to actually register their corporation in Vermont because Massachusetts doesn't actually recognize the L3C mechanism. And that's something that we can really look at. How can we be catching up our legislative and regulatory framework as an infrastructure to keep pace with the innovation of the field? And then, of course, there are people. There are the artists and the creative people who are a key part of the infrastructure. There's no such thing as a great city that doesn't have artists who can thrive in the city. This is very important. And I want to be really clear that I'm not only talking about artists, professional artists, or painters. The word artist, it's not a great word. It's a really limited word. Sometimes we use the word creatives. A lot of people don't know what that means. The advertising industry actually uses that word, and so sometimes you say creatives and they'll think you just mean people in an advertising industry. But I'd like to introduce to you the concept of creative capital. This is the theoretical framework that's going to actually inform our approach to the cultural plan for Boston. And what creative capital does is it really recognizes that most people have a creative impulse in them, whether it's through singing in a choral group. I swear every second person I meet in Boston sings in a choral group. Whether you write poetry, whether you're doing knitting or cooking a gorgeous meal as a creative expression, all people are engaging in some kind of a creative thing, whether it's a hobby, something you do on the side, something you pursue professionally. I've met many, many people in the medical profession who are trained musicians. And so this kind of creative thinking and this creative capital is truly an asset that begs to be supported and really grown in Boston as an incredible asset, not only for our economy, for any job that you might do, but actually as part of the Boston sort of brain trust, right? We're known as this incredibly educated, smart city, but I think we don't really give enough validity to the role that sort of creative expression, growing your creative abilities, and that creative capital really plays in what we do. So we're really thinking about how can we support the growth of that creativity for people, not only for kids in school, BPS, it's acutely important, but also for adults, for older adults, for new immigrants, for the formerly incarcerated, for veterans. Arts and culture plays a very important part of everybody's life, we recognize. But we also feel it's important to support the work of professional artists. How can we help them to access the tools they need so that they can make a living here in Boston and stay in Boston? If they all feel like they have to leave and go to other places to thrive as artists, we're not going to be a great city. We're going to lose the gifts of their creativity. And so I want to just talk about then about the immediate opportunity we have in front of us. It's a new administration. I'm in a newly created role. There's lots and lots of new leadership within city government and lots of planning processes happening right now. And we have the opportunity for arts and culture to really be at the table. The cultural plan that I mentioned very briefly will be kicking off soon, and we'll be inviting the public to get involved in the creation of that cultural plan. You can sign up to be on a community team and be deeply involved. You can sign up to be part of the leadership committee if you want to have a certain kind of a leadership role. You can come to a big public meeting like this. You can send us your ideas. You can get involved in social media. There'll be many, many opportunities for you to share your expertise, your energy, your passion with us. And not only are we looking for ideas, but we're also looking to have a civic dialogue about the value of arts and culture, the role of arts and culture in everyday life. We're definitely looking to cultivate buy-in. Our plan will not be a success if it doesn't reflect the needs of the people of Boston, and if people aren't invested in what's in there. And we're also looking to inspire some cohesion among the arts community, cohesion in neighborhoods, grow that sort of social capital so that people feel empowered to have input and direction in the cultural life of their own community. So I'm going to close with just a couple of ideas about what the course is all about, the 21st century challenges and opportunities. I just love such an ambitious and big idea. And, you know, my takeaway is that change is the one constant. For better or for worse, our city is changing tremendously. I've been hearing so much about all the changes that have happened in Boston, all the changes kind of coming. And if we look at those challenges and opportunities that this course sort of is asking us to look at, I'm sure I'll get an earful about some of the challenges. I think the challenges in Boston, I've only been here for 3 months. I actually moved here right after Thanksgiving, so I'm really super brand new. But resources are a challenge, and I don't just mean money, but I mean resources. Everybody is pressed for time. Space is at a premium. It's a really tight, landlocked city. So resources are a challenge. I've also really noticed that mobility is a real challenge in this city. Getting around is tough. This winter has been acutely dramatic demonstration of how hard it is to get around. We're separated by bridges and water and hills, and our transit system isn't what it could be. I really feel like mobility is an issue. I've also noticed how incredibly not accessible this city is, and how 200-year or older infrastructure has enormous accessibility challenges in my opinion. And so those are just my really brief observations on the challenges, but the opportunities are tremendous. And again, I have just 2 observations about the incredible opportunities here. One of them is technology. When I was telling people in the office about this talk, and I said, wow, you know, what do you think I should talk about? And someone mentioned, like, well, you know, technology has changed how people access and consume and create arts and culture. And I feel like technology is dramatically transforming not only arts and culture, but city government and our lives. And then the other opportunity, and I see that as an opportunity, right? And then the other opportunity in Boston in particular is people. This is an incredibly vibrant, growing city with a young, diverse population. It's been extraordinary to get to know the city and get to know the demographics and the landscape here. And so from my perspectives, those are the really incredible opportunities here. And I think with that, I'm going to close. I hopefully have just left like your head buzzing with questions. I know I've left a ton unsaid, and I'll leave that for the questions and answers, and I think pass it along to Colette. Thanks.
And thank you, Julie, because you have touched on a number of topics that is very relevant to Boston's changing demographics. If you think about the city, I think humorist and pianist Victor Borger says it best. There's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And the truth is that as the demographics in Boston has changed, it is now shifting us into a place where we have to connect. And Boston has always been, I came to Boston almost 40 years ago as a teenager to go to college. And Boston has been a siloed city. And when you think about the arts and you think about culture, art and culture is a great way, I think, The arts tells you the era in which you are living. It's the way in which people express themselves, way back to the caveman. It's like the writings on the cave wall says it's a witness to say, I was here. And if you move that from the caveman expression into, let's say, the time of Michelangelo, art was always meant to be public. It was meant to be enjoyed by people. Somehow along the line, it became sort of exclusive, and exclusive to a certain group of people. And in that exclusionary aspect of the arts and culture, people who were of color, people who were not necessarily wealthy and privileged, were left out of the arts and left out of enjoying their culture. Well, one of the things that Julie mentioned was festivals. And for those of you who are familiar with festivals, she is absolutely right. Festivals have always been a great way for different cultures as they move into a city or a municipality. It's a way for them to recreate their own culture and history, and it could also become an opportunity to teach. How many people here have ever been to the Caribbean Festival in Franklin Park? How many people have been to the Puerto Rican Festival? How many people have been to the Chinatown Dragon Boat Festival? Oh, okay, a little more. So if you think about these festivals, these are ways in which people of diverse culture express themselves and they share their culture with the public. I'm going to talk about how demographics are causing institutions and allowing what was once exclusive to now become more open and accessible to diverse groups of people. So this is the last time they did the census, was 5 years ago. They do the census every 10 years. And the census has really shifted, not just here in Boston, but across the country. Latinos are the fastest growing minority consumer and population group in the U.S., followed by Blacks, followed by Asians, and immigrants. And they are changing the demographics in our country, but they're also changing the flavor of our country. Salsa, not the dance, but salsa, the condiment, has become the #1 condiment in the U.S., surpassed ketchup. And salsa, the dance, has become the thing that everybody wants to do. Everybody wants to learn how to salsa. And if you think about how culture is influencing, you think about words that have now entered into the lexicon of America, you know, what has come up from young hip-hop kids using terminology that has now become part of the American culture, part of Americana. When you say something is fat, it's not F-A-T, it's P-H-A-T, meaning it's cool, which is what they said when I was younger. Now they tell you you're fat, it means that you got it together. So the numbers, let's get back to the numbers. The numbers really do not lie. You know, they don't. You can manipulate numbers, but the reality is this is the diversity that has become the new face of America. It's Latino, it's biracial, it's Asian, It's sometimes you look at someone and you have no idea. And, you know, it's Arab and Muslim, it's African American, and it's younger. The demographics are also becoming younger because the white population is aging while the new emerging population between ages 16 to 34 is much more culturally diverse than at any other time in our history. And then you have the population that was born between 1945 and 1965. It's now aging. We are becoming older people. We are also a large part and a very diverse part of the demographics. So about 7 years ago, as somebody who lived in Boston and sort of got tired of Boston being a very siloed city. You know, you have people, the Irish, the Italian, the Black, the Jewish, the Hispanic, the Asian. They all have their groups and events, and they all get together, but never became Chinese in a real meaningful way. And I have always been somebody who believed that I'm a global citizen. I see the world not in black and white, but in multicolor. And I see diverse cultures. And I thought, as a sort of social experiment, what would happen if I decided to invite the people I know from diverse cultural backgrounds to come and sort of meet after work for drinks and hors d'oeuvres. And as it turned out, I invited about maybe 200 people, and 75, 90 or so showed up. And I said, oh, this is just a fluke. They came for the free hors d'oeuvres. And I did it a second time. 150 people showed up. I said, okay, third time will be a charm. If I can pull this off 3 times in a row, I know I've got something going here. And by the time I did it the third time, the Boston Globe heard about it and came out and did a piece. And as they say, a whole movement was born. And so for me, it was, how do you take this group of people who are young, professional people of all background, multi-ethnic, intergenerational, how do you galvanize these people to really truly make a difference? I looked at all the arts institutions in Boston, and a lot of them do a lot of programming in schools. And that's great. They go out to the public schools, but what about the diverse professional group of people? The ones who can become patrons and donors and board members and be contributors to institutions. So last year, I decided I was going to create Get Connected to the Arts. And the goal of Get Connected to the Arts is to really partner with every art institution, or as many art institutions and cultural institutions as possible in Boston, to encourage them to really engage the diverse population of professional people, business executives and entrepreneurs to really come and explore their institution. So the first 3 institutions that we have brought on board is the Kennedy Library, the Boston Athenaeum. We did an event there last July, and I think the founding fathers must have said, what the heck is going on here? Who are these people? We had the most diverse people they had ever had ever in the history of anything they had done, who came to the Boston Athenaeum. And it was a wonderful way to really connect an institution that people passed by. I myself passed by 10 Beacon Street many, many times and did not recognize there was this treasure that was right there. And it didn't look like a welcoming place. But when people came, the board members, the people who were members of the institution, who were, can I say, a little gray, were quite happy to see that there was this diverse group of professional people who were coming into the institution, and they instantly said anybody who became a member that night would get an instant 40% discount. Well, of course people signed up. Why wouldn't they? And that was a way for them to really bring people in. The other was the Kennedy Library. And we are planning to do something this year to mark the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, which many believe was started by President Kennedy and carried through by Lyndon Baines Johnson. And the third institution is Arts Emerson. So Arts Emerson brings a wonderful programs and performances to Boston. This year it's called The World, and they truly have brought a diverse performances to Boston. And of course, they want to make sure that their audience is, again, diverse. So one of the things that we said, it's get connected to the arts, the power of affiliation. It's all about making people feel like they belong and welcoming them. So, it's got dark in here. So here is what I would like to share with you around changing demographics and how do you engage art and culture and the role that art and culture can play in a great city. Well, first of all, people need art and art need people. And I think one of the statements or one of the sentiments that Julie expressed was we have a vibrant group of young people. And I'm happy to hear that Professor Bluestone has mentioned that young people are staying in Boston. A lot of young people, and particularly a lot of people of color who come here to go to school, decide to leave. And they decide to leave for a variety of reasons. Cost of living is one. But when you ask young people of color, why don't they stay in Boston? Often they tell you that Boston is not a particularly welcoming and friendly city. And so the whole aspect, I think when you think of art and culture, it doesn't matter what your skin color looks like, what your religion is, where you came from. When you step into a museum or you see a piece of public art, something about that speaks to you. And so I am absolutely thrilled that we have a new commissioner or head of art and culture for the city, because I know when I heard her talk about opening up the egalitarianism of art and culture is what it is supposed to be. Art and culture is not meant to be exclusive. It should be inclusive. And it has to be inclusive by inviting people. That's one of the things that I would always credit Malcolm Rogers for doing. When he came here 25 years ago, I can't believe it's been 25 years, he found that the major opening on Huntington Avenue was closed, as if it said to anybody who lived over on this side, this institution is not for you. And they couldn't give him any good reason why the main entrance to the museum had been closed for years. You would have to go on that little street and park across and then go to the museum. The major door of the museum was closed. Well, what's the message that sends to people who live around the museum, who may not live on Beacon Hill or have deep pockets? It says, you are not welcome here. And he changed that. And I have to say, I had the opportunity to work with Malcolm back in the early 2000s to create a diversity program for the museum, to really begin to invite and engage people of color. And as a result of that, I introduced him to the South Asian community. And as a result, that you had lots of South Asians who loaned art to the museum and who became very big financial patrons to the museum. And they had never come to the MFA because they were not invited. And the point here is, once people feel welcome, once people feel invited, amazing things happen when we are inclusive and when we practice egalitarianism. So I, for one, am delighted. I am so grateful to you, Barry, for asking me to come and join Julie and to talk about how demographics are changing and how we can engage a more diverse group of people to really appreciate, be engaged, and support the arts.